Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is what I plan to feed to the worms that live in this bin over here. For those of you that are unfamiliar with my channel or my content, I use worms to compost my household kitchen scraps and paper and other things that are all compostable, stuff that the worms will eat. And what I've got for them today is something that a buddy of mine gave me not long ago. I have actually fed something similar to this to another of my systems. It's the flower of a sunflower. It's a sunflower, I guess, right? And I guess sunflowers are pretty well known for their seeds, but for whatever reason, this flower, I don't think that it didn't create seeds, because you could see all the little holes where the seeds were. I just suspect that birds probably came around and, picked off all the seeds at some point. My buddy who gave me these, last year he gave me a couple of these, but they were still full of seeds, and I've actually still got some leftover seeds from those flowers. This is all that I've got left, and when I asked him again this year if he had any more, he did have flowers for me, but none of them have seeds in them. So nevertheless, it's all compostable stuff that the worms will gladly eat. So that's what they're getting fed today. It's not much. It's fairly small feeding, as a matter of fact. So to supplement that, I've got some coffee and I've got some worm chow. So in my worm bin feedings, the worm chow, not much there either, and the coffee are sort of staple items that I use to supplement the feeding. Now, besides an unusual feeding that they're getting today, there's also a little unusual thing going on down in here, which is me trying to deal with some unusual material that I found floating around within the compost that I harvested from the bin that these worms actually came from 185 days ago. 185 days ago is when this system got launched. Today's feeding is actually feeding number 15, so this bin is quite a way away from being new. It's actually quite old at this point. And when I harvested the castings that these worms left behind in their previous system, I encountered some unusual material that I was suspicious of, so I tried to quarantine that material by placing it into one of these little mesh bags that you get at the grocery store when you buy, I don't even know, maybe onions or garlic or something, I'm not sure, but a lot of you will probably recognize these little mesh bags. And it was in this mesh bag that I had placed that suspicious material. So let me see if I could find an example of it here. You could see the basic shape of what paper looks like after it comes out of my shredder, and the suspicious material had that same shape. So it's something that I ran through my shredder. So it's not just, a couple scraps. There's, probably hundreds of them in here. Some sort of weird stuff. Every time I would grab onto a little piece of that and try tugging it, it would remain very flexible, and rather than breaking, it would just sort of expand like a little piece of rubber. And I wasn't even sure if the stuff would break down, and that was the reason I wanted to keep it separate from everything else in the system by leaving it in this mesh bag. But I also wanted to see if I could prompt worm activity to this stuff to see if, they'll eventually break it down. And as you can see, the worms are in here in great numbers, and that's because I had taken a whole tomato and placed it right on top of the bag in the hopes that as it decays and breaks down, all the juices would flow out of it. It was frozen too, so as it thawed, I would imagine all the moisture came oozing out of it down into here, causing worm traffic. So I'm pretty sure that this is an example of it. Usually if I tug on it, that's the telltale, but I can already tell just from the look of it, it has sort of this weird translucence to it too. So I don't know, I do this in most of my videos. I try to provide this as an example. And then the other thing that makes me, worry a little bit is that I really don't see any signs of decay on this either. If the worms were nibbling on it, you would, gradually start seeing some signs of wear. So I am starting to lean more towards the likelihood that, I'll just have to let this package dry, and then I'll be able to shake it, and then the castings will hopefully pass through the mesh and leave behind the suspect material. Who knows, maybe in time it'll break down, but I can't account for when it was placed in here, but I believe it's been not only the, well, not placed in here. Remember, it came from the other system, so not only 185 days in this active bin, but however much amount of time that it spent in its previous bin, you know, hundreds of days and little signs of wear. I'm really starting to feel like it might be a lost cause. So, whatever. I'm sure a lot of people are going to start providing their input on what they think. Some of the input that I'd received early on was that it resembled the tape that's used to seal up Amazon boxes, and that too has a similar sort of springy, I don't know what the right word is, springiness to it. And that I was also assured that it would eventually break down if it was in fact that. But it might not be. Who knows what it is. I could have accidentally let a piece of plastic slip through my not so thorough screening process, and it ended up getting shredded in with my prepared bedding. My only hope is that I don't start seeing more examples of that elsewhere. For whatever reason, it does seem like this is the only material that I'm finding it in, and I really hope that this is the only place it is. So now, besides that tomato that was placed in here to prompt activity into the red bag, I had also fed them with a whole bunch of fennel. I wasn't even sure what it was when I fed it last week. It was something that my mom had given me, and it was a pretty large hunk of material. But after 10 days of being in the worm bin, it seems like the worms have more or less devoured it, because I see no signs of it. And it was a pretty large piece of material. Not to say that that makes a big difference, because if you freeze a piece of vegetable and let it thaw, a large portion of what that was made up of is probably just moisture that, would have left the food, leaving behind the vegetable matter, which it appears that the worms have more or less eaten at this point. So let's go ahead and give them these sunflowers and the rest of the stuff we're going to feed them with today. I had collected some of these top covering leaves that were placed on here last time. We're going to now use those as the foundation for today's feeding. And I've also got a couple coffee filters here. So we'll give one of the coffee filters as bedding down in the feeding area, but I'll hang on to the other one as a indicator to show us where we last fed. And here's another just piece of bedding. Not a very generous application of bedding on this go around, but at 185 days of age, it might be time to start trying to wean these little guys off of a steady flow of fresh bedding and just let them work on what they've already got in here. And then, hopefully we'll be able to start gearing up these little guys for harvesting their castings and migrating the worms out of the material, getting them relocated into a fresh setup. So I don't know. If you think about it, those flowers are not a whole lot, so maybe the coffee can end up being the majority of what their feeding consists of. Not to mention a little bit of this worm chow here. My worm chow is just a combination of grains and seeds and nuts and flour and cornstarch and anything else that I can get my hands on to include in the mix. I kind of feel like I'm a little bit pressed to get this done, because I'm observing all the little I don't know, I could swing this over here for you. I had put the plastic covering over here, and I could see worms cruising the surface, probably not enjoying the bright light, and it would probably be a good idea for me to get this covering right back onto the system so as to not, cause a panic and have the worms fleeing the plastic to get out of the light. In the end, they're just going to end up on the floor or someplace I don't see them, and they're going to dry and die, and we don't want that happening to our worms. So I think we can work on getting their environment restored and covered up and returned to the shelf so they can get back to work for us. The plastic covering seems to be doing a pretty decent job keeping the moisture in. I remember last week we contemplated the addition of some moisture, and we just figured we would leave it to the moisture that's introduced by the frozen foods that they were getting. And today there's no frozen foods that are going to thaw and melt and provide the system with extra moisture. So we would have the option at this point to inject a little bit of moisture in the form of water, get my spray bottle out, but I don't really feel it's necessary. It might be a little bit hard to tell on the video because it is very loose and crumbly. People might think that it's exceedingly dry, but I don't think it is. Obviously not, because otherwise the worms wouldn't be hanging out in it. So I think we're in good shape as far as moisture goes in here. The only moisture I've been adding, whether or not the system needs moisture, is my BTI solution or the mosquito dunks solution, because it does seem like flying insects here and there are trying to move into some of my systems, at least the newer ones where BTI had never been placed into it yet. But in this system, I think we're in good shape because this system was raised with a pretty regular dosage of BTI being added to it on a regular basis. So I'm gonna skip putting BTI in here because it's not showing any signs of insect activity. And maybe as a precaution I should, but I think I'm just going to take my chances, and we're going to just go ahead and leave it be as is and try to get to the point where we can get these little guys covered up. Before we do though, I'm going to do the same thing as we did last time. Take some of my dry leaves and scatter them across the top. I kind of like that natural top coating of bedding materials. So let's go grab my box of leaves. We don't need to put a lot on. It's almost cosmetic to a certain point, but I do like the way we can use this stuff after the fact. What is this? Am I bringing critters into my system with my leaves? No, maybe that guy was not even alive because I just tried to squeeze him. I expected a little pop and some moisture to come out, but it just cracked in half. Maybe it wasn't even the remains of a creature. Maybe it was just some sort of organic vegetable matter. I don't know. I just kind of worry when I feel like I might be possibly bringing weird critters into my systems with the leaves that I bring from outside. You know what? Let's try to sweeten the deal here a little bit since the feeding is kind of meager. We're going to throw a little bit more of this worm chow right across the top coating of leaves. That'll just give the worms a little something else to nibble on when they come up to the surface. Because they're going to come to the surface for sure. You saw it when we first opened the system. They really like that moisture that recirculates beneath the plastic. And that's the reason we've got worms hanging out all over the plastic here too, because they're coming up for that condensing moisture that collects on the plastic. Regrettably, some of them get adventurous and wind up on the wrong side of the plastic. And that's not a good place to be if you're a worm, because there's no moisture out here and your days are numbered if you end up in a dry situation like this. In fact, I don't think you'd last even a day if you were a worm without moisture. So we're going to restore their environment here to make it nice and cozy again for them. And that's that. So that's it for our little check-in with our African nightcrawlers at day 185. That was feeding number 15. And things are looking pretty good in here with the exception of that weird stuff in the red bag. At some point I think it's going to have to come out unless I start seeing something change pretty radically in the near future. But for now we're just going to let it sit and continue as is. And we're going to see what happens. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. It's always very much appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's also very much appreciated. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.